Hello everybody, and welcome into my little lore cave for my game, Midnight Dawn of Darkness. In this episode, we're covering the greatest war in the history of Valencia, the Dark Moon War, and how soul energy led to the chaining of the moon over the Draken Isles, and the rise of the greatest alchemist mind known to Valencia's history, Thaugar III. This episode will uncover the story of the Dark Moon War, the historical importance of these events, and how this shaped the world of Valencia so that those wishing to know more about them for their own games and stories, or for those who wish to have more understanding of the lore of M.Dot's world of Valencia, can get proper clarification of these major historical events. Sit back, enjoy, and grab some hot cocoa and some popcorn as we talk about the Chained Moon and the rise of Alabaster, the last old god in M.Dot. Thaugar II, Demon Scientist. The story truly begins with the rise and fall of Solgar. However, we covered that during our last lore episode. If you haven't seen it and would like to, the link to the episode is in the description below. This episode will be continuing where we left off, with Thaugar II's story. Thaugar II was a relatively unremarkable Thog in his early days, spending most of his time learning and researching, unlike his father. Thaugar, however, had an innate knack for understanding the soul's innate powers, and understood that the new moon, with its demonic core, had led to increased outbreaks in different locations around the world, as if its presence would bring more demons wherever it was overhead. It's a theory he had for a long time that the demons would work as a form of biofuel, where if they could channel the moon's power into a form of reacting zone, they could harness the demonic energy within the souls of demons to power many of the world's utilities and structures for usage worldwide, while also helping to contain and protect many from the demonic forces. Thaugar II was accredited with all of this discovery work and research, and would discover that the use of arcane runes for dowsing rods to geolocate the demon summonings could be made to fully contain demon summons into a single small zone for processing. It was inhumane, yes, but also contained an also inhumane problem within the world. To many, it was considered a solution to a problem that had almost no negatives. The twins' birth. Thaugar II would, at this time, continue developing his studies while siring twins, Thaugar III, the current namesake to the bloodline of the time, and Garthog II, a name reserved in honor for the progenitor of the family. While his naming of the younger of the twins was considered slightly controversial at the time, his family was a happy one, built around teaching the two young kids about their gift for alchemy, while Thaugar worked towards designing more and more into his plans for the chains, the giant constructs that would run throughout the world to hold the moon in place and provide the world with its powers. Thaugar would use the development of his children's abilities to help refine his studies he would make over the next 20 years of their life, using their works and assisting with his great arcane abilities to refine the tools needed for the process. Everything was working well within reason, and inevitably, the plans were drawn out to construct the demonic processors, material requirements gathered, and a greater understanding of the ordeal to come was determined. Rock and stone of many caves were to be used to create the chains, and Golshinen and the Way of Green were to be requested to help produce more rock needed to create the chain links. Each one needed to be refined, sorted, and to have a specific funneling enchantment built into each one to extend the moon's signal from wherever they were considering stopping the orbit of the moon. Additionally, an immense arcane feat needed to occur so as to not only stop the moon for an immense period of time, but to keep it skyward during the chaining of the moon. After the chaining, orbits would stabilize with the chains if they were positioned properly, syncing it with the rotation of Valencia and keeping it rotationally locked around the planet, without any chance of failure. The issue was more towards the events leading there, and magnifying the forces so as to make it happen. More planning was needed for the fine aspects of it, and firstly, they needed to gather the materials first and foremost. While they worked towards refinement, they would start the gathering of materials, developing alchemy to further lower the required requests of the chains, and, inevitably, with the aid of a large amount of alchemists in need of a job within the arcane fields, help create the Coal South Alchemist Outpost, where at least one of the chains was to be placed regardless, to guarantee stabilization of the moon overhead. While Thoggar III didn't immediately gain the rights to being the head alchemist at the Coal South Labs, he would inevitably be coming around this time in the build-up to the Dark Moon War, working on his own magnum opus, but getting stuck without a solution. His main goal was best described via the definition of nirvana, in the sense of finding a way to make something that was one with everything. Attuned in such a way it could channel the innate creation magic all alchemists wielded, and allow them to emulate on a small scale the like of the Creator, without the knowledge of his existence. His developments led him immensely far at this time, reaching most of the way there, but falling to the final hurdle of claiming nothingness. Everything includes nothing, and nothing includes everything, making this seem like an impossible task. His wall, his true end goal, would be the completion of the search for Null, an exploitation of its elemental capabilities. But how to find nothing? Chain material gathering. While Thoggar worked towards Null, Garthog and Thoggar II worked towards gathering many cast-off stones from around the world, using it as fuel for many alchemical processes needed to create as much rock to form the chains as they possibly could. High salt contents within the rocks were a must, a requirement determined by salt's many natural arcane qualities. Its major usage being in salt circles, quite literally named for the salt used, being able to naturally magnify arcane runes inscribed in the circle formed with it. The saltier the stone, the better the connection from the moon to Elincier with the chains would be. It was during this time as well that with great effort, the alchemists would convince the Colored Ways, Solbari, and Darvanis that to help eliminate all demon outbreaks within the world, this was the way to go. It was many trials, many long-winded discussions, and many long hours, all culminating into one final agreement. The chains would be built, and, with the sacred grounds of the Draken Isles being effectively a nullifying zone on the demons the moon was channeling forth, would be the skies in which the moon would find its final resting grounds. The question was simple: where were the chains to be placed? Dark ideals. As questions rang out, a lot of worldwide aggression was shown. Everyone wanted a piece of the power to be gained by this, whichever meaning you take that to be. It was around this time our head alchemist, Thoggar III, would take a quick and temporary leave, in search of some inspiration from his ancestral calling. He would make the trip across the world to Antaros, in which he would head to the Tomb of Thog, where all of his ancestors had been laid to rest. But this was only the beginning of his search. He wasn't entering just the anteroom, he needed to head to the deepest chamber, where Garthog I had been laid to rest. Through many trials and tribulations, grand ordeals set by his ancestors, and sheer strength and willpower alone, he inevitably unraveled the puzzle box that was the tomb, finding himself in the place where the greatest of his ancestors had been laid to rest, a singular story splayed across the walls, and two urns at the end. One of lead and steel, nullifying and containing the force sealed within, and one of clay and salt, the urn containing the remains of Garthog Thog. Thoggar was puzzled, confused as to why there were two urns, as the wife of Garthog I had been in a sarcophagus many rooms prior within the maze he went through to get here. This was something dark, evil. He understood upon looking at the murals, displaying the story of the world's true creation. The second urn wasn't a person. It was a burial for the old gods, a creator, and worse, its killer. Reverence wasn't the reason for its inclusion, and sealing containment was the intent of all the tribulations. He and his tomb makers, Garth and Augur Thog, were the only three members to have ever made it here, in front of the two urns. Then he heard it, the silent whispers emanating from within the urn, promising him the desires for the creation of nothing, the solution to his greatest problem, his true finality within his intended magnum opus, the answer to so many problems. All that was needed now at this time was simple: organization. A drunken stupor hit him as he sat there scrawling in insanity, warping his mind with the whispers emanating from within the second urn, echoing with a name he had never known yet felt so familiar with, echoing the name Alabaster. His wants and needs would be satisfied by the old god. His needs would be satisfied. Alabaster would rise again. Alabaster would rise. Alabaster would shape. Words he scrawled over and over in the stone, scrawled with a stone he would use to chisel into the chamber and destroy it in his maddened state, driven by this demonic possession of the old god driving him. Chipped into the mural displaying Elincier, he found the spots that he would set the perfect ritual stations, using the moon as a grand salt circle with the chains to inevitably, with enough human souls sacrificed to remove the bindings on Alabaster, bring him back from his current state. The moon seed, the jail cell containing the being, shuddered with potential and fear. After all, the pieces just needed to be assembled. 8 countries would be given the news shortly of the chains they would be given to watch over and use to grant power to the world around. It's only after some time the final shift would be made. Thaggar would take the moon seed from its housing urn as requested, to inevitably be fully assembled and merged with the moon upon the chain's completion. And now, with a prepared deal set forth, Alabaster's seeds had been planted in Thaggar's mind, sending him forth to claim where best to locate the chains to hold the moon. Chain construction. Chain construction had 2 major important parts to it: formation and alchemy of the major chain pieces, and additionally actual organization and localization of the pieces to form the major chains upwards towards the final location of the moon. Additionally, beyond the chain construction was the selection of who would oversee the chain bases, where all the demons would be summoned and processed for energy, and the major problem alongside all of this, stopping the moon in the first place. For the chains, each chain link was to be 300 feet long and 100 feet wide, with an internal cutout 50 feet in depth into the chain. The overall ratio of the design was determined best for the material distances and material usages, with what was calculated to be the distances towards the moon. A massive amount of these needed made, with large amounts of alchemy needed to be done for each of the chains within the Colsouth base, where every chain would be alchemically put together with whatever material gathered, and then prepared to be shipped to the 8 locations of Colsouth, Agayatir, Sarenvir, Poisil, Eskos, Theonentios, Asya, and Greylor, as determined by Thaggar III, who, while being a bit awkward after his recent experience, seemed relatively normal to those on the outside. But, to those closer to him, there was something up, something many people wanted in on. This is something we will cover shortly. For now, back to the chain specifications. For each of the locations, a large set of gravity magnifying runes had to be implemented around the bases in the surrounding fields, which in turn would be carried up the chain and applied to solid structures once each chain link was in place. Furthermore, for heightened atmosphere construction, an inevitable void construction as they reached out towards it with the chains, air containers with vacuum teleporters were made into extensive suits with heavy thermal protection and warming to negate the cold of the vacuum of the void surrounding Elincier. Effectively, construction required immense amounts of teleportation and transit of large chains into place via controlled teleportation, with immense measurements being done via scouts sent up with the suits to higher ends of the chains. Inevitably, the chains each reached temporary zones for holding just below the moon's orbit, with the intent being that a timed teleportation from a boat armada carrying the final 8 chain links would be used to link the final chains, with Solvari Darvanas slowing the moon to a crawl while it was done. The final chains were set to telefrag into the moon at a specified depth, effectively burying half of the final chain's links into the moon's surface, finalizing the harmonizing resonance for each of the chains. Finally, of course, was the decision on who would oversee the summonings at each of the locations, and Thoggar III deemed it relatively based on who he saw fit not only to be persuaded by Alabaster, but hide the inevitable true intentions of the chains in the future. These 9 members were Torrance Caris of Sarenvir, Kao Ricardus of Agaetir, Senel Ferran of Escos, Caltron Deos of Theonentios, Tetra Selen of Hoisil, Teros Citra of Aswaye, and Veritano of Greylord. Each of these people had relatively different backgrounds, some being workers of the chain base's constructions, such as Tetra, or leaders of the country, such as Torrance and Kao, or other jobs that seemed quite out of place, actually, like how Caltron was an assassin prior to his appointment. The 8th and 9th members of this we've already discussed quite well, with head alchemist Thoggar III being the main leader of the Coalsouth chain base, and with Garthog II overseeing the work as necessary while he handled his other duties. Each of these members had one theme that made them overall perfect for Alabaster's plan, which was made in partial dealing with Thoggar to assemble. Now, Null was to be his soon, now that he could give the old god all the pieces he had requested for his overall end goal of godly creation capabilities. Alabaster's deal. After the appointment of each chain-based leader, and the chains running in full for roughly a year, Alabaster called the crew together through Thoggar's vice to gather the 9 for his full deal. In a demonic display of power, the Moonseed began to erupt in dark liquid, leaking the demonic form of Alabaster to the 9 present. His simple request for each chain was to plant flowers near the base. In return, he would grant the 8 leaders of each chain with any power they requested. These flowers, which would in the future become simply known as chain flowers, were ginormous in bloom and worked in 2 parts, consuming the body of whatever human placed within its petals, dissolving them as food for the flowers, and secondly, channeling the soul towards Alabaster, where he would consume it and gain power from it. This wasn't spoken as part of the deal, however. With power and wishes on the table, each of the leaders could hardly resist the mass of what was capable. However, you may have realized an issue. For 9 leaders, there were only 8 gifts, and the one for Thoggar, and by extension Garthog, had already been determined when the deal was initially planned over a year ago. With the gift of Null being given to both of them, Garthog felt cheated, but Thoggar felt ecstatic. These gifts, however, were a curse in disguise, allowing for a connection between each of the leaders and Alabaster, allowing him to effectively control their minds from wherever in the world. One final request was made to Thoggar as the final requirement of the deal, this being that the Moonseed be transported to the moon's surface. As the Moonseed itself couldn't be teleported, Thoggar III himself would have to take the long trip of arcane transport via speed manipulation to the moon, a dangerous journey in comparison to simple teleportation. Some of you may be curious as to why this request was made, and it comes down to this. When the universe collapsed, the Moonseed was cracked, and a tiny shard of it fell between realms, a meteorite which would implant itself into Nilvoy, shattering Nilvoy's core, causing it to continuously crumble, and effectively being a major cause in the increased demonic invasions to Valencia, as the dying realm's inhabitants needed structure and a home. With Nilvoy's core shattered, many demons were next to death, especially the Sins and their grand demons. Solgar, wounded in battle from internal demonic wars for space within Nilvoy, would graft the meteorite that shattered the core into his scarred eye, giving him his look that is depicted in legends. This shard of the Moonseed, as Alabaster was aware, was needed to allow him to finally truly reform, hence the request of transport to the moon. Alabaster would forcibly meld the seed into the moon, and as he gained power, moved the seed deeper and deeper towards the missing piece he needed. This, alongside gaining the power needed to break the seed, was Alabaster's true goal. So, he started to request sacrifices, controlling the hands of his now loyal subjects. Betrayal of the Twins. As Torrance had access to his entire prison surrounding the chain base, the sacrifice request seemed easy to get. He himself would put to death many for the rights to his gift of being an Iron Fist ruler with strength and power to match. His first prisoner killing was done without notice, without any qualm. Soon enough, the others followed suit, bringing the people they had captured to the flowers, putting them to death silently, focusing on those lost and alone with nowhere else to go. Soon, disappearances started happening, mostly thought to be demon outbreaks in certain locations, but some held theories towards what it could actually be, some who would be silenced for their outspoken values, so that the colored ways wouldn't catch wind. And when the ways did come knocking, as they were required to, demons would still be getting sacrificed, on show for the knights to each confirm that demonic power was still what they were working and using, believably uncorrupted to the simple eye. Inevitably, Garthog would sacrifice their own father for the flowers, blaming the madness that drove him to it on his brother, who had no influence on any of their actions at this point. He had just finished his true magnum opus, the Infinite Aeon Converter, which could take anything, including nothing, and create from it. Something beyond all reason, beyond all natural senses. The power was immense, and, leaning into his newfound madness and anger at his twin for having caused all this slaughter and sacrifice, Garthog would poison his twin, wipe his memory, and tell the others of all the wrongdoing he had done, sending him to be tortured by Torrance after having his memory wiped by Vera. It was effectively the perfect plan, but none could predict the events that would soon follow. The Sarenveer Escape. On a dark, stormy night, Thaggar and 11 others were carted up the shores of Sarenveer into a prison surrounding the chain. Having his memory wiped, he had no memory of his gift, no memory of his achievements, just the memory of his name, but not its meaning. The others on his caravan each have a relatively dedicated history and knowledge that, if exposed, would have shown the true intention of the chain bases as human sacrifice machines. The 11 others included Viselis, Princess of Amateus, and her close-knit guardsmen, Balgriff, Viridian, and Josephine, a powerful set of mages in Anagram and Ein, Eskin Coliseum fighters in Elonli and Roderick, sister of the current Blue Knight, Masami, a powerful wandering healer in Masaki, and an assassin named Sweeney, who used to work for the Theonentius chain base. Each of them would awake as thunder struck near the island, with no memory of their past lives, and very quickly learn of their horrid fate from chatting outside the carts. Thaggar and Sweeney each separately call for the other members to quietly find time to meet amongst each other, and, once they arrive at their cells, inevitably collude together to get a plan working together. They had less than a week to get out, as a prisoner sacrifice was coming, and they, as new prisoners, didn't want to stick around long enough to find out what that meant. With each gathering, stealing, and smuggling materials around the prison, they eventually were able to form a way to escape by rushing their way through the underbelly of the base, through the arcane banks of magical systems, towards the front gate of the prison, the only way in or out. Once they arrived out of the entrance courtyard, however, they're spotted, leading to the base releasing their giant guard ogre, captured and kept as a pet by Torrance himself. They quickly worked their way through, fighting into the gatehouse while being assailed by the ogre and other guards, opening the gate for only a few moments and stealing some horses for the group to ride on, before eventually rushing off into the forest, the guardsmen chasing after them. Inevitably, the group escaped by hiding in the woodlands of the island. However, they weren't out of the woods yet. They would need a way to escape the island, and having just experienced some of the chain base's fury and aggression for those that stood against them, they felt a need to target one of the base's supply boats, hopefully stealing it for transport of their own. As luck would have it, the docks in Sarenveer still had one of those ships amongst them, one that had taken some of the prisoners here to begin with. The Dragovich, a simple shipping boat, with a crew of 5, would be majestically and successfully assailed and have its crew dismantled one by the 12, taking care to keep the fighting as quiet as possible, with Viselis taking charge as the ship's captain. With her past on the waters giving her great expertise in navigation, she was able to successfully guide the group away from Sarenveer towards the mainland of the western hemisphere of Valencia. Ancestral Memory. The group sailed to Antaros, fishing on the boat for food while they headed south, in search of some way in this world. Having escaped Torrance's grasp, they searched for guidance and a way forward. Upon landing in Antaros, they found themselves being slowly led towards the Tomb of Thog, the ancestral burial ground where Thogar had visited not too long prior. Unrecognized and unknown, the 12 seem to have become lost to this world's knowledge, due to their now much different looks. But those they found seemed supportive of Thogar due to his family. Word hadn't gotten out about what the chains were doing, and so, wanting to stay in the shadows, the 12 merely moved through, making their way up to the Tomb of Thog. With Thogar at the lead, they found themselves making their way into the tomb and through it, now filled with demons. After hours and hours, they found themselves at the inner sanctum, in front of the crazed word Thogar had scrawled on the stone years prior. Confused, they found the ramblings and markings pointing towards one thing: Alabaster, an unknown name to all of them, but one that held immense fear in their hearts. Demons had already infested the tomb. Surely this alabaster was the cause of it. After analyzing the tomb and clearing it out, they found that the rambles seemed to point towards the chain locations, seemingly to be the provision of the old god's strength. They decided they must go against the chains, having personal proof that people were being sacrificed to the chains for unbeknownst reasons. With what they found, and what they had discovered, they made their way to a Gaiatir, to hopefully handle the first of the chains with what strength they could muster. With a long journey ahead, they'd prepare what they could, alchemizing and enchanting their weapons and armor for the combat soon to follow. Circus of the Chain. As they arrived near the shoreline and crossed through the mountains, they inevitably arrived outside of a gigantic circus tent, in the wilderness surrounding which had been built into the Gaiatir chain. The Gaiatir's circus was famous world-round, and their country's leader, Cayo Ricardus, had taken head of its management when he became ruler of the country. As our group watched, they saw many disfigured creatures, of which were part of the circus's show. The group stealthily made their way towards the circus, eventually finding what looked to be a lost girl, which they tried to help back towards civilization. The girl, however, was an illusionary trap, and to catch unsuspecting people off guard and bring them towards the circus where they could capture them for sacrifice. Luck was on the 12's side, however, as right at that very moment, Tanel, the current Blue Knight and grandson of Liam, was there to investigate the chain base. Seeing as the group was trespassing, Cayo called for their arrest, claiming they were thieves there to tamper and mess with the chain. Tanel was apprehensive, but then recognized a familiar face, his sister, Masami, who had gone missing months prior. He obliged in arresting them, if only for the confusion and possibility of the other members being of ill intent. After the arrest, he took them away from the chain and individually questioned them, only to find his sister without memory, and that Thogar III was among them. Thogar's trial. Tanel was conflicted with his arrest of not only his sister, but Thogar as well. Surely there had been some sort of mistake. Tanel had only spoken with Thogar II, not the third, which now stood before him, during the chain's inception, and from his understanding, the family was all for the chains. Additionally, dealings were made not too long ago for the materials to make the chains with Gulshanen. Surely his sister, who now had no memory of his existence, was traveling with some form of imposter. He'd see soon enough. Using his connection with Conrad, he called for the assembly of all the Colored Ways, having been persuaded slightly by the words being spoken by the 12 about the chains being of evil origin, and called for something that hadn't occurred in quite a long time: a Draken trial. A trial which would be presented in front of 6 of the 7 dragons, with only Solvari in absence as she flew overhead. Additionally, all 4 of the Colored Ways would bear witness to the trial, and form the jury of which the 12 would stand to speak their case. The travel to the Draken Isles were bittersweetly beautiful, with most of the 12 being fearful for what was to happen, now being captured and incarcerated again. Upon arrival, they were given a place to rest while the other Colored Ways arrived, enjoying the countryside and calming aura the islands had, enjoying their temporary stay on Solvari's roost. They wandered throughout the greater plant life, and observed the ruins of the past from here. from the genesis of all humanity. It was beautiful, and yet they still felt an ominous presence. With the day of trial's arrival, a group of 12 was led in front of Tanel, Zerali, Zaran, and Blaine, the four colored knights, and their ways. As they entered the trial hall, the old grand hall where the trials were held at the beginning of Man, Darvanas and the other 5 land in their respective locations, waiting to listen and judge all the 12 had to present to the gathered crowds. So they gave their story, explaining what they understood of the chains, the human sacrifice they had heard of, and what they found within the tomb, the demons held within, and its ransacked state, with scrawlings claiming Alabaster, whoever it may be, will rise if the chains are left alone. Sensing they were telling the truth, the dragon seemed somewhat persuaded. However, the members of the Colored Ways seemed confused and alarmed with what knowledge they held. Thogar was part of the chain's workings, or so they thought. And furthermore, what hard-stated truth did they have? These were simply words, nothing more. And furthermore, this challenged everything the world had been working towards for a generation long. It was unheard of. Absurd. So they stood in trial, answered questions, providing what reasons they could, with Darvanas and the other dragons listening and seeing the truth within their words. Until finally, no more questions could be asked, and the Ways saw what they had thought they had controlled since the beginning. Demons were controlling the chains, sacrificing some of their own to upkeep the guise of greatness, with the real intent being the rise of this Alabaster. None could find any history of the name, not even the dragons themselves. Before the end of the trial, with permission of the dragons to hunt the chains as the secret start of the Darkling War, Darvanas saw a dark gift held within Thogar, and requested he use it wisely, lest it consume him. Thogar, honoring the dragon's request, promised that once he learned what his gift was, it would only be used for the well-being of the world, and in a drive towards the end of the chain's plans. Null Discovery. After being given the rights to fight by the dragons and Colored Ways themselves, the group felt invincible. However, they had yet to see the true might of a Chain Lord and their gift, something they had no concept of yet. They were returned to the Dragovich via Tanel in the Way of Blue's own personal boat, and granted a personal promise that when things went south, Tanel would personally come to their aid. So they made their way back to the Chain Circus, which, since their last visit, seemed entirely different. Hunting their way through the underbelly and its halls, they found that each of the disfigured creatures had a rune inscribed in demon's blood mixed with something else, something that our alchemist Thogar couldn't define under any means. It didn't help that whatever this rune was, as crazy as it sounds, was reviving and reconstructing the creatures they would slay right before their very eyes. No matter what happened, they were hunted and continuously fighting off hordes of the reconstructed creatures made by Kao's gift of stitched life, letting him reanimate and make anything he wished to have eternal life, unbound by any restrictions. Stitched life, after the twins' betrayal, had been given as a precaution to every Chain Lord, but Kao himself went a little above and beyond, applying it to his entire circus as well, so as to guard the chain. When they finally found the Chain Lord and confronted him, the man seemed oblivious and uncaring to any harm dealt to him, as if unfazed, unbothered, and unenthused by their weakling blows. Seeing the fight as useless, Thogar felt despair in his actions, crafting bombs to blow up the man, which were doing nothing, until he heard a dark call from within. Unbeknownst to him, Alabaster was reminding him, prodding him to use his gift. The hint was simple. Call its name, Null. And so, with everything he had worked for on the line, his friends faltering before him, he called for Null, blasting the man piece by piece into oblivion, with each bomb ripping him, atom from existence. The destructive power of Null, being effectively the definition of nothing, was immensely dangerous, and after this event, left Thogar terrified knowing what power he seemed to possess. But, with the job done, and the Chain Lord defeated, they made their way back to the Dragovich, silently. In between this and their next attack, each of the members worked religiously to refine their crafts, with Thoggar effectively beginning the steps needed to remake the Infinite Aeon Converter from scratch all over again. The plan was simple, to make their way to the next chain they knew of, and meet with Tanel in Sarenveer, as war would soon officially break out with the chains having now been attacked. Return to Sarenveer. With war beginning, their travels were hastened, and a message was sent through Bird to Tanel and the other Color Knights to start weeding out the chain base's guards in whatever coordinated attacks that could be made, weakening the chain so as to allow the 12 to make their attack. This was especially important, as with what they had learned at Gaiatir, all of the Chain Lords could only be killed by the power of Null. So, upon the fighting breaking out, they joined the assailing of Sarenveer with Tanel, and fought alongside him against the demons Torrens had employed into his forces and men he had as guard for the chain. Inevitably, the group would fight an Ifrit, a demon with immense power over fire. However, with Tanel's lance, Conrag's Claw, would be dealt with extremely effectively. After the main demons were handled, Tanel went to handle the others within the city streets, so as to keep as many people safe and not sacrifice as possible, while the 12 went to fight Torrens himself. Torrens was an immensely powerful being, using the blood of those around him and the blood of those he put to death to empower and gain immense strength through his gift of ancestral blood, empowering him to be a combat master. With his great strength, the battle was relatively even, making him a deadly threat for our crew. Null, however, gave no cares for his strength, and no qualms with his gift, and removed him from the world all the same. With it, Alabaster absorbed his strength. Null had a secret part of it, originating from the old god itself. That was a twisted version of what Element Zero's true version was. Null would absorb the power of whatever was removed with it, whatever it destroyed, and would then grant that strength to Alabaster as a mighty, direct sacrifice. It was Alabaster's catch in the deal, however. The memoryless Thoggar didn't know what strength he was serving by using Null to destroy his opponents. Torrens was like a full water balloon of soul energy to Alabaster, giving him even more power. After this battle, to help with the speed, the 12 would refit the Dragovich into being an airship, making the lower deck of the ship into an arcane engine, which, after starting up, was effectively a rocket-propelled ship with unbelievably powerful power. In their testing, they were able to fly around Elincier within a day or less, depending on the winds and their flight path. The speed would greatly assist in the rest of the war. Hoizil Chain. With the airship made, they kept up the tempo, taking aim at the technical lord of the chains in a hope that she would have info towards a weakness within them to fry or outright destroy the chains entirely. So they landed on the Hoizil Great Lake, and made their way into the reasonably remote chain base owned by Tetra Selen. Her chain was built into a massive pit, with the only safe access to the chain being through an intense puzzle of orientation within the effectively giant Rubik's Cube. Its robotic cards and confounding room layout made the way to the central core extra difficult, and in said core was where Tetra was waiting to ambush the party and defend the chain. Tetra's gift was one of mechanical resonance. Effectively, not only could she control any machinery with her powers, she could send messages and signals to the other chain members from anywhere in the world. By targeting her, the group was effectively targeting the planning system and messengers the chains had, keeping them working together in harmony, as they had intended. It would cause panic and major problems for the remaining chain leaders. And so they fought Tetra in her mechanical power suit built to handle the 12 as best as she could, with the entire structure beginning to collapse. Tetra set the entire base into overdrive to power her mechanical suit, until the main structure exploded, dropping her and the 12 into the immense pit below. The group, having made some slow-falling potions in preparation, quickly drank and caught themselves on a large slope, keeping them alive and fighting Tetra as they slid towards the true chain base at the bottom. Once there, with her suit out of power, Tetra was nulled by Thoggar, and the parts of the base were converted into a particle collider for Thoggar's alchemical needs. After this battle, Thoggar reached roughly 50% of the way towards the Infinite Aeon Converter, and began to struggle with menial roadblocks that had caused pause to his path prior. Eskin Chain. With most of the immensely powerful powerhouses handled, the crew turned their eyes towards the last things keeping the chain bases afloat: propaganda. 3 of the remaining Chain Lords, in Sinal, Taros, and Vera, were all social-related powers built in mind control or mind editing. Sinal's was one that they found most dangerous, as his songs were able to force rage upon his opponents, making them turn on their own. So, they had a different idea on how to handle this one. Misaki, with her immense cooking knowledge and assistance from the others, would infiltrate his chef squadron at the Coliseum chain he ran in Escos, feeding him a deadly, senseless, and tasteless neurotoxin from a pufferfish they had captured within their downtime. They would then, with great luck, evade every trap and precaution set within the man's home, effectively mailing a lit bomb directly to his hands, and killing Sinal while he slept. There was no conflict and no fear, just one simple, easy kill. After this, the crew deemed it necessary to find a phoenix within the world, in search of hopefully creating a resurrection staff, a powerful healing spell which, given enough time, could bring back someone from the dead. With how deadly the chain bases were becoming, and how screwed they realized they would be without smart planning like this, it seemed almost necessary to find it. So, with almost a month of downtime, they searched the world looking for any rumor of a sighting they could find, and eventually making their way to the Cloud Mountains. Side tangent, yes, this group did take a month-plus break while the Ways were handling the entire war with the chain bases. There were some very awkward decisions they made within this war that, in all honesty, do not make sense in terms of just what people at war should do innately. With a few extra weeks, they were able to find and befriend the Phoenix at the mountain peaks, and perfect their gear to the highest effects they could. After the Phoenix offered some down, they thanked the creature, gifting it with large amounts of meat as thanks. The Anentios Pyramid. Seeing their forces all being torn apart, bit by bit, the remaining 4 Chain Lords came to a conclusion. Garthog would remain in Kol South, where he would uphold and try to complete the final sacrifices needed to bring Alabaster, as the remaining sacrifices sat in the hundreds at this time. Easily doable with all the soldiers and enemies that had died for or against their cause. The other 3, Caltrin, Vera, and Taros, were to gather in the most extreme stronghold in the Anentios, where no attacks had been made due to it being constructed in the middle of the world's biggest desert. If only our crew hadn't converted the Drakovich into an airship. So the 12 went chasing for the remaining 3 on mainland, diving into the desert near the pyramid, and assailed it with all their might. In their way stood 4 grand challenges, which, while immensely difficult, stood no chance to the might they had all collectively gained. And so, with power that couldn't be rivaled, they stood against 3 of the Chain Lords at once. With Caltrin, Desert Haze, whose gift was to be like the wind in all aspects of speed, elusivity, and visibility, turning him into the deadliest assassin known to man with his gun. Taros Citra, a teleporting aggressive force with her gift of relativity, allowing her to instantly move anything within relevance of another object within the world. And finally, Veritano, Mindwipe, which had a gift to rewrite, delete, and exchange any memories she wished. She was the reason our 12 heroes had no memories, so each had a personal reason to try and take her down. However, with the 3 Chain Lords working in tandem like this, they were nearly unkillable, posing great threat and challenge to our 12. So, in one final attempt to handle the threat, the group collectively decided to drop the roof on the 3 Chain Lords. Yes, drop the entire roof of a pyramid onto the Chain Lords, in a hope to separate them in the confusion, trapping them off from each other for some hopefully easier fights. What they didn't realize was in doing so, they may kill some of their own, like, oh, I don't know, Thogar, the only one who can truly kill these guys, you know? Sure is lucky they recently got that resurrection staff, and sure is lucky that someone, anagram, decided they could be a beast and literally suplex Caltrin, the gunslinging god, for 4 minutes on end. Anagram's a mage, and he did this. What the frick? These 12 were insane, especially with how built they got themselves to be to handle the Chain Lords in so little time. As the roof fell, Caltrin was left unharmed. Most of the 12 except Masaki, Anagram, and Sweeney were killed under the roof. Teros was trapped and couldn't get out, and Vera, with her unfortunate positioning, was being dragged along the grounds of the desert by a swinging of the chain that had now had its base removed. A problem to be handled later. Meanwhile, what ensued was effectively the greatest wrestling match with guns until Thagar could be resurrected to kill Caltrin, the group unburying the other members and beginning to resurrect them while Thagar dug out and killed Teros. He then went to stop the chain from wiping out a large amount of civilization, and kill Vera by an immense feat of alchemy which would embed the chain into its new home in stone, imparting its energy into a converter that Thagar had built as part of his magnum opus to help condense and contain the momentum of the chain. With these three handled, the group felt they could take on anything and everything, especially one measly Chain Lord. However, they could hardly prepare for what was to follow. The Battle of Kol South. While they were chasing the remaining Chain Lords, the Colored Ways were preparing for a final push to weaken the forces at Kol South, preparing for the final battle. Meanwhile, Thagar and the crew finalized their efforts and made Thagar the second form of his magnum opus again, with a second Infinite Aeon Converter. With its godlike power, they knew they could handle and create anything they would need at the final chain base. When they arrived, the dragons and Colored Ways were already fighting against the demons and alchemists and warriors converted to the chain's cause, in a hope to stop the outcome of the sacrifices. Unfortunately, Garthok had played the long con, knowing full well that win or lose, enough sacrifices had been made, and enough enhancing enchantments made to the flowers especially, that no matter what happened, enough sacrifices would be made by the time he or his assailants died. So our crew of 12 ragtags made their way into the fray, blasting through the lower demons like they were nothing, and meeting up with Tanel and the other Colored Knights one last time, giving them the plan as chaos broke loose, and finally, in one last hurrah, watching the Knights clear the way for them to make it to the apex of the Kol South Alchemist base, where Garthok stood overlooking the whole fight peacefully. With one simple threat, he explained the situation to the 12, brandishing his own Infinite Aeon Converter, the first one Thagar had made, and how win or lose didn't really matter here. Alabaster would rise just as Thagar, his brother, had dreamed. Now with dreams becoming reality, it was perfect timing for the mistake to make its way all the way back to its origin. With no words left to say, Garthok took charge, intending to personally offer his brother and his new friends as a final sacrifice to Alabaster himself, using his imagination and weaving Noel into almost every attack, making him a much deadlier force than could be expected. Overall, this fight was a battle of the gods, which required every facet the team could think of, and then some, to truly win. In the end, through friendship, hard work, and opportune strategies, the crew of 12 gave Thagar the final moment he needed to slay his brother, paying him back for the immense betrayal that had set this war in place, and ending it just like it had started, twin versus twin. As the group looked to the sky, they saw all the chains across the world dissolve into black goop, falling like a horrid rain, and rush inwards towards the Draken Isles. And then, the moon began to fall, its shell of ice collapsing in on itself as it did. Alabaster's rise. With the moon's collapse releasing a dark sea of demonic energy across the land, our crew raced to the airship, preparing for the worst. As they flew over the Draken Isles, they saw it, the remains of a cast-over shell of the moon, and a cocoon of dark energy swirling. They landed, looking upon the cocoon, hearing it scream as it began to hatch. Erupting from the cocoon of the Moonseed's final form was Alabaster, the old god who killed the creator of the universe, who slew Santos, the judgment god whose two halves formed Sylvari and Darvanas during the universal collapse, and the combination of the End, the god built to destroy and reset the universe, and the Source, the font of all ideas for creation. The 12 held no chance to fight this creature, to fight this old god, even with all the strength and power they amassed, the whole sum of all the work they had collected and constructed across this journey. They had to stand strong and prepare the fight anyways. As they battled, something inside Alabaster began inspiring them, strengthening them, empowering them. A mistake Alabaster had made thousands of years prior when he became encased in the Moonseed. He had absorbed the Creator, which, if it had worked properly, would have given him control of all things, good and evil created in naught. However, it was done with anger and aggression in combat, during the end of the universe. The Creator had sealed Alabaster's power within the Moonseed, keeping his strength contained while the two undying creatures warred within the realm it bore for millennia, and now stood fighting within the mind and body of Alabaster, even now. As this battle raged on, the 12 saw the shuddering mass of Alabaster falter within its light-speed movements, losing strength in his cataclysmic blows. They were fighting side by side with the Creator, leading the charge and carrying the battle from within. It was a devastating battle, on the verge of death the whole time. Each of the 12 could barely hold on, until finally, Alabaster showed weakness. A single voice in his head called out to him. However, unlike all prior times, it called his gift by a different name: Purity, the true name of Element Zero. He called it forth the same way he had in old, and a singular blast withheld the end of the universal beings, dissolving into black below the sea. The last of the moon shell dissolved with the end of Alabaster, and with a quick rush, the group boarded the Drakovich one final time as an adventuring party, and headed away from the Draken Isles back to Coal South. As the world rejoiced at the end of the war, and the final of the Chain's army and summoned demons fell, peace around Elincier finally came to be for the first time in a long while. Creation's return. Time effectively stood still for the next few weeks. Most of the party returned to where they had learned their home was, or went off to live a new life, with the friendship they gained following a majority of them into their future lifestyles and bringing about wonderful interactions amongst the crew every so often, when fate and life let them meet again. Misaki and Masami joined the Way of Blue. Balgruuf, Vazelis, Viridian, and Josephine returned to their home in Almateus. The princess, without her throne, became a simple farmer with her old guard. Alonwi and Roderick became mercenaries. Ein and Anagram returned to the Antros Mages College, and Sweeney disappeared. Thagar III took his old position as head alchemist, reformatting Coal South's work to be towards new energy designs, and, inevitably, finding Cavalieric soul energy, a much safer, more humane, and much more natural form of soul energy than that which was used in the war. But prior to that, there was something else that was important to discuss. After the war ended, Thagar was riding the Drakovich through the Draken Isles, one of the things he had been doing during the time span after the war when deciding what exactly he would like to do with himself. It was then that he noticed a pink speck amongst a bead floating in the water. He pulled the boat aside, dropping a kayak within reach of the bead, which, when he finally got closer to, he touched, and found himself amongst the Astral Gate, home of the Creator. Upon climbing the pink stairs, he reached the old hall where his ancestor had once saved all of creation, the peak of the Astral Gate, and a lone simple man, adorned in a blank white mask and a black raven wings. The Creator himself. They spoke about all that had happened, what was and what was to be. But that discussion is a secret kept between both, one of which will never be uncovered. With the Creator returned, the universe could begin to grow again, like it had before the collapse. But this time, something much different would happen with this galaxy's new beginning. Something much cleaner, smarter, and less likely to end in dust. With that, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this and like to see more, down in the description is not only going to be a playlist for the series, but a playlist for the campaign I'm running on this channel, Depths of the Blighted Heart. If you'd like to help out or just contribute to the ideas of MDOT, fan art is always welcomed, and is appreciated in the Discord server, also seen below. Leave a comment for any lore you'd like to see covered in the future, or if you're confused about something. I always try to respond to all the comments on every video, so if you'd like to know more, ask me there or in my Discord. Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye!